The water runs clear, but I still see red. 14 times now. 14 times I have stood at this marble basin in the cathedral washroom of St. Margrave's shrine, my hands beneath the flow, scrubbing with the coarse soap they provide for pilgrims. The water is cold enough to hurt. The soap smells of lye and promethium byproducts, harsh and chemical. My skin has gone raw, the knuckles cracked and bleeding slightly, adding new blood to chase away the memory of old. But the stain remains. It is not on my hands, you understand. When I hold them up to the flickering candlelight that filters through the chamber's stained glass windows, I see only skin, pale, weathered, marked with the small scars that accumulate over years of service. The callus on my right index finger from gripping a stylus during endless hours of documentation. The burn mark on my left palm from where I once touched a still-hot bolt pistol casing without thinking. Ordinary hands, human hands, clean hands. But I see blood nonetheless. I cannot remember whose blood it was. This troubles me more than the memory itself. There have been so many. The heretic on Vandros Prime whose throat was opened during interrogation. Arterial spray painting the walls of the holding cell in patterns that almost resembled the 8-pointed star he had worshipped. The child on Seferis Secundus, caught in the crossfire during the purge of the Underhive cult, small body crumpled against the rockcrete like a discarded doll. The Inquisitor's own blood, dark and smelling of counterseptic and stims, when I helped the medici seal the wounds after the demon's claws had found their mark. Or perhaps it is my own blood I remember. The first time I was required to participate directly in an execution. The way my hands shook so badly I could barely maintain my grip on the last pistol. The recoil I was not prepared for. The way some of it splashed back onto my uniform, warm and thick, and how I vomited in the corridor afterward, until nothing remained but bile and shame. The details blur together now. Faces merge into a singular expression of terror, or defiance, or empty resignation. Names fade before I can properly file them away in my memory. Planets and missions compress into a sequence of grey corridors, interrogation chambers, execution yards, and burning cities viewed from orbit. Somewhere in that compressed timeline, blood touched my hands. Literal blood. Real blood. So much of it that even now, years later perhaps, or months, time moves strangely in the Inquisition service. I cannot feel clean. The cathedral outside these washroom walls echoes with evening prayers. I can hear the faithful singing hymns to the Emperor's glory, their voices rising in harmonies that speak of faith uncomplicated by knowledge. They believe in righteousness absolute, in enemies clearly defined, in servants of the throne who stand between them and darkness, noble and pure and incorruptible. They do not know about the blood. They do not know about the compromises written in flesh and signed with suffering. They do not know that the Inquisition protects them not through purity, but through willingness to bear contamination that would break lesser souls. They do not know that the servants they venerate in their prayers go to sleep seeing blood on clean hands. I turn off the water. My hands are clean. They have been clean since the first washing. I dry them carefully on the rough fabric of the provided towel, watching the redness fade from my skin where the scrubbing and cold water have irritated it. In an hour, even that will be gone. In an hour, my hands will show no evidence of this ritual cleansing I perform whenever the memories grow too vivid to ignore. I fold the towel precisely and return it to its place. I straighten my uniform. I check my reflection in the polished brass mirror above the basin. I see a face I barely recognize anymore. Older than my years, eyes that have forgotten how to reflect light properly, a mouth that has spoken too many condemnations to remember how to smile. The evening prayers continue outside. The faithful sing of the Emperor's protection. I rejoin the service, taking my place in the shadows near the back where inquisitorial servants are permitted to observe. My hands rest at my sides, clean and steady, and forever stained by things the faithful must never know. This is what it means to serve the Inquisition. This is what I have become. I was not always this. Once I was unremarkable in every way that mattered. My name was entered into the administrative census of Hive Tertius on Venora as Scribe Tertius, Classification Delta, Subsector 9. I processed shipping manifests in a grey office that occupied the 347th level of the Administratum Spire. The work was endless and repetitive and comfortingly predictable. Cargo shipments from the orbital docks required documentation in triplicate. Export licenses needed verification against imperial tithe records. Quality certifications had to be stamped and filed according to protocols established during the Age of Apostasy and never revised since. I was good at this work, exceptional even by the metrics that mattered to my superiors. My error rate was 0.03%, well below the acceptable threshold of 2%. My daily quota exceeded requirements by an average of 17%. I arrived precisely on time each morning and departed precisely on time each evening. I recited the morning prayers with appropriate reverence. I maintained my workstation with proper cleanliness. I reported irregularities according to established procedures. I remember the smell of that office with a clarity that disturbs me. Printed parchment and synthetic ink. The ozone tang of overworked data looms humming their eternal song of processing. Recaf brewing in the communal alcove, bitter and burnt because the heating element had needed replacement for 3 years, but the requisition forms remained unapproved. The faint mildew scent that permeated everything in the hive's middle levels, where moisture collected in the recyclers and never quite dried. My HAB unit was 6 levels below my workplace, 8 meters by 6. Efficient, clean. I shared a hygiene facility with 7 other tenants. I ate corpse starch flavored to approximate grox meat on 4th days and vitamin paste on other days. I owned 4 sets of work clothing, 1 set of rest clothing, and a small collection of approved devotional texts. I had no family. My parents had died in a factory collapse when I was 12. I had no romantic entanglements. My social interactions consisted of brief exchanges with co-workers about processing quotas and prayer schedules. It was a good life. I believed this absolutely. I served the Emperor through diligent labor. I contributed to the Imperium's function. I asked for nothing beyond my allotted rations and my assigned space. I was content in the way that comes from never imagining anything different. Then the Inquisitor arrived. There was no announcement, no warning. One morning I arrived at my workstation to find a man standing beside my desk. He wore a long coat of dark leather, expensive beyond anything I had seen outside of hollow broadcasts. His face was unremarkable, almost aggressively average, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But his eyes were different. They looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch, as if he could read every thought I had ever filed away in the archives of my mind. Behind him stood 2 others, a woman with augmetic eyes that clicked and refocused constantly, a massive man whose build suggested combat training far beyond that of typical enforcer cadres. Neither spoke. "Scribe Tertius," the man said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "Your attention to detail has been noted. Your loyalty scores are exemplary. Your psychological profile indicates acceptable stress tolerances and appropriate devotional conditioning." I did not understand. I stood there, stylus still in hand, a half-completed manifest glowing on my data slate. "You have been selected for service to the God Emperor's Holy Inquisition. You will accompany us immediately. Personal effects will be collected and forwarded if deemed appropriate. Say your farewells now if you require them." I thought it was an honor. I actually thought that. Standing there in my grey office with the smell of burnt recaf and mildew, I felt a surge of pride that my service had been recognized, that I had been chosen for something greater than processing shipping, manifests for the rest of my natural life. "I require no farewells," I said, and my voice was steady. "I am honored to serve." The Inquisitor's expression did not change. Later, I would learn to read that particular blankness. It meant he pitied me, but knew pity was useless. It meant he had seen this moment play out 1,000 times with 1,000 other unremarkable clerks and scribes and functionaries pulled from their mundane lives. It meant he knew what I would become, and grieved for what I was in that moment, standing in my grey office, believing I had been blessed. They escorted me to a shuttle on the orbital platform. I watched through the viewport as the hive spires of Venora shrank into the industrial smog. The planet became a sphere, then a disk, then a point of light, then nothing. I never returned. I never would. The person who had been Scribe Tertius, Classification Delta, Subsector 9, died during that ascent, though I did not know it yet. The Inquisition does not recruit. It consumes. The first 3 weeks aboard the Inquisitor's ship were dedicated to orientation. I studied procedures for evidence documentation, chain of custody protocols, interrogation transcription formats, and the proper prayers to recite when handling potentially corrupted materials. I memorized the organizational structure of the inquisitorial retinue. I learned which decks were accessible to someone of my clearance level, and which were sealed behind doors I was instructed never to approach. I was efficient, thorough. I asked appropriate questions and absorbed information with the same systematic precision I had once applied to shipping manifests. The work was different in scope but similar in nature, or so I believed. Documentation, classification, filing, the maintenance of records so that the Inquisition's vast machinery could function with proper coordination. My first assignment arrived on the 22nd day. The Inquisitor summoned me to his strategium and handed me a data slate containing preliminary raid reports. A suspected cult cell had been discovered in the lower commercial districts of a civilized world called Mericus 6. The raid had been conducted with typical inquisitorial efficiency. Suspects were detained. Evidence was collected. My task was to catalog that evidence for further analysis and eventual presentation to the Segmentum authorities. I expected documents, perhaps forbidden texts or corrupted scripture, maybe heretical iconography that would need to be described in clinical terms for official records. I had mentally prepared myself for the intellectual challenge of identifying symbols and cross-referencing them against the extensive databases of known cult practices. Instead, they brought me to Cold Storage 3. The chamber was located deep in the ship's lower decks, far from the inhabited sections where crew quarters and operations centers maintained the comfortable temperature of normal human occupation. The corridor leading to it grew progressively colder as we descended. My breath began to mist. The woman with augmetic eyes, whose name I had learned was Interrogator Vash, walked ahead of me without speaking. Her mechanical lenses clicked and adjusted constantly, reading data from sources I could not perceive. She unsealed the vault door with a biometric scan and a spoken prayer. The door was thick, reinforced, inscribed with wards against corruption. When it opened, cold air rolled out like water, carrying with it a smell I had never encountered before. Chemical preservatives, sharp and astringent, layered over something organic and fundamentally wrong. Not quite decay. The preservatives prevented that, but the smell of death nonetheless. Unmistakable and absolute. "Your assignment," Vash said, gesturing into the darkness beyond. I stepped inside. The lumens activated automatically, harsh white light flooding the chamber, and I saw them. dozens of examination slabs arranged in neat rows, dozens of bodies laid out with clinical precision. I had expected evidence. I was looking at evidence, human evidence, dead evidence. Some of the bodies displayed obvious mutations, extra limbs sprouting from torsos, skin mottled with patterns that suggested diseases no natural pathogen could produce, faces twisted into expressions that anatomy should not allow. One corpse had hands that terminated in crab-like pincers instead of fingers. Another had eyes that had multiplied across the forehead like a cluster of rotting fruit. But others looked completely normal. A middle-aged man whose only distinguishing feature was a faded tattoo of the imperial Aquila on his shoulder. A young woman who could have been a factory worker or shop clerk, unremarkable in every visible way. An elderly person whose weathered face spoke of decades of honest labor. Children. There were children among the dead, small bodies arranged with the same dispassionate organization as the adults. Heresy often wears the face of innocence. The Inquisitor's voice came from behind me. I had not heard him enter. Corruption begins in the heart and soul long before it manifests in the flesh. These people attended cult gatherings. They spoke forbidden names. They offered prayers to entities that hunger for human suffering, some knowingly, others believing they were simply participating in harmless social gatherings. The result is the same. He handed me a data slate and a stylus. Document each one. Physical description, visible marks or mutations, any symbols scarred or tattooed into the skin, estimate age and probable occupation based on visible characteristics. Take genetic samples for the Medicae to analyze. Be thorough. Be precise. The accuracy of your records may determine whether their contacts are identified and purged before the corruption spreads further. I looked at the slate, then at the bodies, then at my hands, which had begun to tremble slightly. Begin with row 1, slab 3, the Inquisitor said. The female, approximately 30 years of age, no visible mutations. I approached the indicated slab. The body was cold when I touched it to check for rigor mortis, cold in a way that went beyond simple absence of life. The skin felt wrong under my fingers, like touching something that had once been human, but had already started the journey toward becoming something else, even in death. I began to document physical characteristics, clothing remnants, the small 8-pointed star carved into the flesh behind her left ear, barely visible beneath the hairline. I worked with mechanical precision because precision was what I knew, what I had been trained for. But something inside me shifted during those hours in the cold storage vault. I began to understand that the Inquisition's work existed in a realm beyond the simple categories of right and wrong I had been taught to believe in. These people were heretics. They were also human. Both truths coexisted, and somehow I was required to serve a purpose that acknowledged both while being moved by neither. The work became routine with disturbing speed. Weeks became months, and I learned to see what normal eyes could not perceive. Interrogator Vash trained me personally. She taught me that corruption announces itself in subtle ways long before it manifests in flesh. A prayer recited with one word slightly misplaced, changing devotion into invitation. Symbols that appeared proper at first glance, but revealed their true geometry when viewed from specific angles. The way certain artifacts seemed to bend light around themselves, creating shadows that fell in directions that defied the source of illumination. I practiced on seized materials until I could identify the signs without conscious thought. My reports grew more detailed, my observations more precise. The Inquisitor reviewed my work with something approaching approval. I was becoming useful. I told myself this was good. That usefulness meant I was serving the Emperor's will, that my selection had not been an error. Then came Verdania Secundus. It was an agri-world, peaceful and productive. rolling fields of golden grain stretching to every horizon. Small settlements scattered across the landscape, their populations dedicated to cultivation and harvest. The air smelled clean when we made planetfall, carrying the scent of growing things and rich soil. Children played in the village squares while their parents worked the fields. The local priesthood maintained modest shrines where the faithful offered thanks for the emperor's bounty. The planetary governor met us with confused hospitality. There had been no reports of heresy, no unusual activity, no signs of corruption. He seemed genuinely bewildered by the Inquisition's interest in his unremarkable world. "We are investigating reports of unusual harvest yields," the Inquisitor said, his tone conversational. "Your production records indicate 7 consecutive years of bumper crops, grain yields exceeding projections by 30 to 40%. Remarkably consistent, remarkably fortunate." The governor beamed with pride. "The Emperor's blessing, my lord. Our people are faithful and hard-working. The soil is rich. We have been blessed with ideal weather patterns." "Show me the fields," the Inquisitor said. We walked through acres of grain ready for harvest. The stalks stood tall and healthy, heavy with seed. Everything looked normal. Perfect even. Too perfect. I began to notice it as we walked. The absolute uniformity of growth. The complete absence of blight or pest damage. The way the grain seemed almost swollen with vitality. Each kernel plump to the point of bursting. The Inquisitor knelt and took a sample of soil. He smelled it. His face went very still. "Summon the Medicae," he said quietly. "Full biohazard protocols. I want genetic analysis of the crops and blood samples from the population. Immediately." The results came back within 3 hours. The grain was saturated with viral agents, dormant but viable. Nurgle's gifts, woven into every seed and stalk. The soil itself was infected, teeming with plague spores that would remain active for decades. The population showed infection markers in their blood work. Every person who had eaten the grain, breathed the air, touched the soil. All of them carriers now for diseases that would bloom in approximately 5 years, then spread through trade routes to 1,000 other worlds. A cult had been blessing the fields, not with prayer to the Emperor, but with offerings to the Plague Father. They had been doing it for years, carefully, gradually, building a reservoir of infection that would eventually cascade into pandemic. The cultists were found and executed. 12 farmers who had genuinely believed they were ensuring good harvests through traditional folk practices. They died confused, insisting they had only wanted to feed the Imperium. The Inquisitor ordered exterminatus protocols. I stood in the observation deck of our ship as the cyclonic torpedoes descended. I had walked through those fields that morning. I had seen children playing in the village square, laughing as they chased each other through streets lined with modest homes. I had watched farmers working with simple tools, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their hands strong from honest labor. The first torpedo struck, then the second, then the third. Firestorms spread across the continents. The atmosphere ignited. Within 6 hours, Verdania Secundus was a burning sphere, its surface scoured clean of all organic life. 3,400,723 people, according to the last census records. All dead, all burning, all necessary. "Better this than allowing them to become vectors," the Inquisitor said, standing beside me at the viewport. 5 years from now, they would have spread plague to every world they traded with. Billions would have died screaming as their bodies betrayed them. This is mercy. Quick, clean, final. I told myself I understood. I nodded. I filed the incident report with appropriate clinical detachment, noting the successful identification and elimination of heretical corruption. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my quarters, staring at the ceiling, counting. 3,400,723. I broke it down by settlement, by family unit, by the children I had seen playing that morning. I counted until the numbers lost meaning, then counted again. I have never stopped counting. Even now, years later, I carry the dead with me. Verdania Secundus and all the worlds that came after. The numbers accumulate, the names fade. But the counting continues, an endless litany of necessary deaths that I recite in the darkness when sleep will not come. The Inquisitor was right. It was mercy. I understand that now. But understanding does not make the counting stop. The counting did not stop. It became the rhythm of my thoughts, the background noise of my existence. But the work continued regardless of what it cost me in sleepless nights and accumulating guilt. 2 months after Verdania Secundus, I was assigned to my first interrogation. The subject was young, perhaps 23 or 24 years old. A manufactorum worker from a forge world in the Segmentum Obscurus. He had been detained during a routine sweep of suspected cult activity. Evidence found in his HAB unit included scribblings in a journal, drawings of symbols that matched patterns associated with Tzeentchian corruption. He claimed ignorance, said the drawings were copied from damaged machinery he had been assigned to repair, said he had no understanding of their meaning. He was terrified. I could see it in every trembling movement, hear it in the way his voice cracked when he spoke. He begged to be believed, swore loyalty to the Emperor, recited prayers with desperate fervor, as if devotion alone could prove his innocence. The Inquisitor assigned Savant Grotius to the interrogation. Grotius was more machine than man, his body augmented over decades of service until little organic material remained. His face was a mask of brushed steel and optical lenses. His hands had been replaced with multi-jointed appendages that could configure into various specialized tools. When he spoke, his voice emerged from a vox grill in mechanical monotone, empty of all emotion or inflection. "You will record," the Inquisitor instructed me, handing me a data slate. "Every word, every response. Transcribe exactly what is said. Note the progression of physical deterioration. Document the moment of breakthrough when truth replaces deception. This is how we learn." I took my position at a small desk positioned to provide clear view of the interrogation chair. The cultist was secured with restraints at wrists, ankles, neck, and forehead. Grotius approached with the efficiency of someone performing routine maintenance on a machine. "Subject designation," Grotius intoned. "Worker Tertius, Manufactorum 7, Hab Block 93. Suspected heretical corruption. Interrogation commencing at 1400 hours, standard imperial time. What followed lasted 18 hours. I will not describe the specifics. Some things do not need to be preserved in language. The Inquisition maintains detailed technical manuals for those who require such knowledge. What matters is that I recorded every moment, every question asked in Grotius's emotionless monotone, every answer given, first in denial, then in confusion, then in screaming, then in broken whispers. The cultist claimed ignorance for the first 4 hours. Then he admitted he had known the symbols were wrong, but had been afraid to report them. Then he confessed he had copied them because they fascinated him. Then he revealed he had shown them to others. Then he named those others. Then he described meetings held in the deep maintenance tunnels beneath the manufactorum. Then he detailed rituals performed by people who believed they were simply seeking forbidden knowledge. Then he mapped an entire network of corruption spreading through 3 star systems. Grotius worked with mechanical precision. No anger, no satisfaction. Simply the systematic application of techniques designed to extract information from unwilling subjects. The cultist's body failed gradually under the process. Blood loss, shock, organs beginning to shut down from sustained trauma. By hour 16, we had everything. Names, locations, meeting schedules, the identity of the cult's leadership, contacts on other worlds. Enough intelligence to dismantle an operation that would have eventually summoned something terrible into reality. Billions of lives saved through information purchased with one man's suffering. The cultist died at hour 18. Shortly after Grotius concluded the session, his heart simply stopped. The medici was summoned to harvest genetic samples and perform autopsy. I completed my transcription, formatting it according to proper protocols, cross-referencing names against imperial census records. I felt nothing about the death. This realization came to me as I reviewed my notes, ensuring accuracy before submission. A man had died screaming 3 meters from where I sat. I had listened to every scream, recorded every plea for mercy, watched his body fail piece by piece, and I felt nothing. What I felt was satisfaction. The interrogation had been successful. The information obtained was actionable. The Inquisitor would be pleased with my thoroughness. Already I was thinking about the next steps, the raids that would be conducted, the cult cells that would be purged before they could metastasize into something worse. This frightened me more than anything I had witnessed during the interrogation itself. The torture had been horrible but comprehensible. The cultist's suffering had served a purpose. But my own numbness, the absence of horror or grief or even basic human empathy, this was something different. Something that suggested I was changing in ways I could not control. I was becoming something I did not recognize. The person who had processed shipping manifests and felt pride in efficiency would have collapsed at witnessing such suffering, would have vomited, would have wept, would have felt something. I felt nothing, only the cold satisfaction of a task completed successfully, only the mechanical pleasure of information properly categorized and filed. I wondered if this numbness was a mercy, a psychological defense against experiences that would shatter an unprotected mind, or if it was its own form of corruption, not the taint of chaos, but something equally insidious. The slow death of everything that made me human, replaced by the cold efficiency the Inquisition required. I did not know which possibility frightened me more. The Inquisitor found me 3 days later in the ship's observation chapel, a small chamber near the stern where a single viewport looked out onto the void. I had taken to spending time there during rest cycles, watching stars drift past in the silence of space. The counting was quieter there, the dead less insistent. He entered without announcement and stood beside me at the viewport. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The ship's engines thrummed distantly through the hull. Somewhere in the lower decks, crew attended to their duties with the rhythmic efficiency of those who had learned not to ask questions about their service. "I was 27 when they selected me," he said finally. His voice was different than I had heard before. Quieter, almost contemplative. A junior Lex mechanic in the Adeptus Administratum, assigned to the Calixis sector archives. I believed absolutely in the Imperium's righteousness, in the clear division between the faithful and the corrupt, in heroes who saved the innocent and villains who received justice. He paused, and in that pause I heard the weight of centuries. My first Inquisitor was a woman named Hestia Carde. She had served for 90 years when I met her. Do you know what she told me during my first interrogation observation? She said that I would either break under the horror of what we do, die in service before breaking became necessary, or become like her. She said there was no fourth option. I found my voice, though it felt strange to speak in this moment. Did you believe her? No. I thought I would be different, that my faith would sustain me. that I would find a way to do this work without losing myself in the process. He turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw his face without the mask of professional detachment. He looked ancient, not in years, though Juvenile treatments could only do so much over multiple centuries of service. Ancient in the way that mountains are ancient, worn down by endless exposure to forces that grind away everything soft and human. The Inquisition does not fight for humanity's purity, he continued. Purity is impossible. Every world carries seeds of corruption. Every soul harbors darkness that could, given the right circumstances, bloom into something monstrous. The merchant who curses a rival and unknowingly invites Zentian, attention. The soldier who feels corns whisper in the heat of battle. The artist who touches Slaneshi aesthetics while seeking transcendent beauty. The farmer who offers Nurgle's blessing to dying crops without understanding the price. He gestured toward the viewport, toward the infinite darkness beyond. Out there, billions of humans commit small heresies every day. Tiny compromises, minor blasphemies. Most will never progress beyond momentary weakness, but some will. And we cannot save everyone. We can only prune enough of the infection that the species endures another day. Then what is the point? I asked, and heard the desperation in my own voice. If corruption is inevitable, if we can never truly win, why continue? Because the alternative is extinction. His words fell like stones into deep water. The forces that press against us do not tire, do not compromise, do not offer quarter. Chaos would consume every human soul into eternal torment. The Tyranids would devour all organic life and leave nothing but emptiness. The Xenos would reclaim the galaxy and erase us from history. We stand between humanity and 1,000 different forms of annihilation. Not because we can achieve victory, but because surrender means the end of everything our species has ever been or could become. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and the gesture felt both comforting and terrible. You are changing. You have felt it. The numbness. The ability to witness horror without breaking. This is not corruption. This is adaptation. The human mind was not designed to bear what we must bear. It protects itself through detachment, through the death of certain emotions that would otherwise drive us mad. And if I lose everything that makes me human in the process, then you will have company. He smiled, and it was the saddest expression I had ever seen. Every inquisitor, every interrogator, every servant who survives long enough to be useful. We all stand on the far side of humanity, looking back at what we used to be. We remember, we grieve, but we continue, because someone must. I looked at him and saw my future. Not the specific details, but the essential truth. The centuries of service. The accumulating weight of necessary atrocities. The slow erosion of everything soft until only purpose remained. You will either break, die, or become like me, he repeated, echoing his own Inquisitor's words. There is no fourth option. I am sorry this is true, but sorry changes nothing. He left me then, alone with the stars and the counting and the terrible understanding that I had already made my choice. The choice had been made. I understood this now. What remained was learning to live with its consequences. My first field command came 6 months later. A governor on a prosperous hive world called Callisto Tertius stood accused of Slaneshi corruption. The evidence was circumstantial at best. Reports of strange art displayed in the gubernatorial palace, rumors of excess at state functions, whispers from rivals about unnatural charisma and suspicious influence over the planetary court. Nothing concrete, nothing that would survive scrutiny in any conventional investigation. But the Inquisitor insisted the taint was there. Trust the pattern, he told me during the briefing. Slanesh corrupts through beauty and excess. The signs are subtle until they are catastrophic. Find the proof. Cleanse the corruption before it spreads. He assigned me a team, 3 enforcers, an interrogator, authority to conduct the investigation with full inquisitorial mandate. It was a test, I understood, a measure of whether I had truly adapted to the work or remained too compromised by remnant humanity to be useful. I arrived on Callisto Tertius determined to be thorough, determined to prove my worth, determined to find what the Inquisitor knew must be there. I investigated for 3 weeks. I examined the governor's art collection piece by piece, searching for hidden symbols or corrupted aesthetics. I found elaborate sculptures and painted canvases that displayed technical mastery and artistic vision. Nothing heretical, nothing that spoke of chaos worship, simply art that celebrated human form and achievement in ways that might have been excessive by puritanical standards, but remained well within acceptable imperial norms. I interviewed household staff, analyzed financial records, reviewed security footage of state functions. The governor entertained lavishly. Yes, maintained a collection of fine wines, commissioned works from talented artists, but nothing suggested worship of the Dark Prince. Nothing indicated corruption beyond the normal excesses of planetary nobility. I found nothing, but I was expected to find something. The pressure built with each passing day. The Inquisitor's words echoed in my mind. Trust the pattern. The taint is there. Find it. I began to reinterpret innocent behaviors through lenses of suspicion. The governor's eloquence became unnatural charisma, suggesting demonic influence. His appreciation for beauty became obsessive excess. His popularity among the populace became evidence of psychic manipulation. I interrogated servants more aggressively, pushed harder during questioning, applied pressure until fear produced the confessions I needed. A maid admitted she had seen strange lights in the governor's private chambers, though later I would realize she had simply described candlelight reflecting off crystal decanters. A chef confessed the governor had requested unusual ingredients, though the recipes were traditional dishes from his homeworld. A secretary claimed to have transcribed coded messages, though the codes were simply administrative shorthand. Still, it was not enough. Not concrete, not sufficient to justify execution. So I manufactured evidence. A small idol purchased from a dealer in illicit antiquities, placed carefully in the governor's private study where a search team would discover it. Correspondence with known heretics, forged with appropriate attention to detail and backdated in communication logs. Testimony from a servant who I had broken so thoroughly during interrogation that he would confess to anything I suggested. The governor was arrested, his family detained, the evidence presented, execution orders issued. I watched as he and his wife and 2 children were purged in the central square, their bodies burned before crowds who had cheered his leadership only days before. The planet was placed under martial law, a new governor installed, order maintained. 2 weeks later, while processing the governor's seized files for archival, I found it. Actual evidence, hidden in encrypted personal correspondence. The governor had been investigating a Slaneshi cult operating in the Underhive, had identified its leadership, had been preparing to request inquisitorial assistance for a coordinated purge. He had been innocent. Worse than innocent, he had been an ally, and I had murdered him to satisfy expectations I had placed upon myself. I destroyed the evidence, burned the files, deleted the records. I told no one. The secret sits in my chest like a tumor, growing heavier with each passing year. I understand now why the Inquisition operates in absolute secrecy, not to protect humanity from the truth of what lurks in the darkness, but to protect the Inquisition from accountability for the atrocities we commit in the Emperor's name. We are granted unlimited authority because someone must make impossible decisions. But unlimited authority wielded by fallible humans produces inevitable horrors. I had become complicit in creating the very corruption I was meant to fight. Not the corruption of chaos, but the corruption of power unchecked and certainty unquestioned. I was the monster now, not transformed by warp exposure, but by the simple human capacity for self-deception in service of institutional purpose. The counting continued, but now it included names I had no right to remember. The governor, his wife, his children, all innocent, all dead by my hand. I carried that secret for 8 months before my Inquisitor fell in battle. We were purging a demon incursion on a shrine world in the Gothic sector. The engagement went poorly. Reality fractured in the cathedral where the summoning had occurred. Things that should not exist poured through tears in space. My Inquisitor fought with the fury of someone who had served for centuries and understood exactly what defeat would mean. He killed 12 lesser demons before the greater demon's blade found him. I watched him die, watched his body dissolve as warp energies consumed flesh that had been sustained by juvenat treatments and sheer determination for over 200 years. His last words were not prayers or curses, but tactical instructions. Seal the breach. Use the melter charges on the summoning circle. Do not let my death be wasted. We sealed the breach. The world was saved. My Inquisitor's name was added to the rolls of honored dead, and I was reassigned. Inquisitor Vex was different from my first master in every way that mattered. Where the old Inquisitor had been measured and methodical, Vex was aggressive and experimental. Where caution had guided our previous operations, audacity defined our new approach. Vex was what the Ordo classified as radical. Puritans whispered that he walked too close to the very corruption he was meant to destroy. I watched him bind a minor demon into a weapon during our second mission together. The creature shrieked as he spoke words in languages that hurt to hear, forcing it into a containment matrix within a power sword's blade. When activated, the sword cut through armor and flesh with unnatural ease, the demon's essence providing power that no conventional weapon could match. "Heresy," I said, the word escaping before I could restrain it. Vex looked at me with eyes that held no shame. "A tool, nothing more. Would you rather I fight demons with conventional weapons that barely scratch their essence? This blade has banished 17 warp entities that would have otherwise required orbital bombardment to contain. How many innocent lives saved justifies this small compromise?" I had no answer. The logic was flawless, the result undeniable. Yet I thought of the cultists I had interrogated who had used similar justifications. The end justifies the means. Necessary sacrifices. Greater good. 3 months later, I watched Vex negotiate with a heretic, a tech priest who had been excommunicated for experimenting with xenotech. The heretic provided schematics for a device that could detect warp signatures through layers of shielding that would normally mask them. In exchange, Vex granted him immunity from prosecution and access to materials the Mechanicus had forbidden. "That man has violated every sacred principle of the Omnissiah's worship," I protested. "That man's device will allow us to identify corrupted individuals before they can summon entities that would consume entire hive cities," Vex replied. 10,000 souls on Mordia 7 are alive because I made this deal 3 years ago. Would you prefer they died to preserve ideological purity? The missions continued, each one successful. Each one achieved through methods that would have resulted in execution if employed by anyone outside the Inquisition. We used Xenos artifacts recovered from Eldar. We studied forbidden texts to understand enemy tactics. We even employed sanctioned psychers whose power levels exceeded safe limits, burning through their lives like candles to achieve objectives that conventional forces could not accomplish. Worlds were saved, Plots were foiled, enemies were destroyed. The results justified everything. Every compromise, every violation, every descent into methods that should have been unthinkable. I began to understand the Imperium's greatest hypocrisy. The Inquisition condemned citizens for the smallest deviations from orthodoxy, while we ourselves wielded every tool of damnation in humanity's arsenal. We burned people for possessing forbidden knowledge, while we maintained vast libraries of that same knowledge. We executed those who trafficked with demons, while we bound those same demons into our weapons. We purged populations for using xenotech, while we employed it ourselves whenever expedient. The rules applied to them, not to us. We stood above law and doctrine, granted unlimited authority because someone had decided we were wise enough to wield corruption without being corrupted by it. But I knew better now. I saw it clearly. We were corrupted, not by chaos, but by certainty, by the absolute conviction that any means justified the end of survival, by the belief that we alone possessed the wisdom to determine what sacrifices were necessary and what lines could be crossed. One night, I stood before a mirror in my quarters aboard Vex's ship. I looked at my own face and barely recognized what I saw. My eyes were cold, calculating, dead in the way that interrogator Vash's eyes had been when I first met her. The eyes of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. The eyes of a monster wearing human skin. I had become the thing I once feared, not corrupted by warp exposure or demonic influence, but by the simple human capacity to justify any atrocity in service of a cause deemed righteous. I thought of all the people I had condemned for lesser transgressions than I committed daily. I thought of the governor and his family, innocent and dead. I thought of the cultists who had believed their small compromises were justified by circumstances. I was them, worse than them, because I wielded the authority of the Inquisition and faced no accountability for my actions. The reflection stared back with eyes that held no judgment, only acceptance of what I had become. The mirror's judgment became prophecy 3 years later when Inquisitor Vex received intelligence about cult activity on Venora, my homeworld. The hive where I had processed shipping manifests in a grey office that smelled of burnt recaf and mildew. I had not thought about it in years, had trained myself not to remember. The person who had lived there felt like someone else entirely, a character from a story I had once read and mostly forgotten. A Zentian cult has infiltrated the Administratum infrastructure. Vex briefed me in his strategium. Sector operations, multiple levels. Your former workplace is confirmed as a primary node of corruption. The conspiracy has been active for approximately 7 years. 7 years. I had been gone for 9. The corruption had begun shortly after my departure. You will lead the investigation, Vex continued, watching my face for reaction. Unless you wish to recuse yourself. Proximity to the subjects may compromise objectivity. The choice is yours. It was a test. I understood this immediately. Recusal would prove I retained too much attachment to my former life, that I could not be trusted to place duty above sentiment, that I remained compromised by the ghost of who I had been. I will proceed, I said, and my voice was steady. The descent to Venora felt longer than it should have. The hive spires rose from the industrial smog exactly as I remembered them. Nothing had changed in the architecture or the atmosphere. Only I had changed. I was returning as something the person who had left could not have imagined becoming. The administrative office occupied the same level it always had, the same grey walls, the same humming data looms, the same smell of burnt recaf brewing in the communal alcove. But the people were different, younger. Faces I did not recognize occupied most of the workstations where my former colleagues had once sat, except one. Sector Supervisor Matthews still maintained her desk in the corner office overlooking the main floor. She was older now, her hair completely grey, her face more deeply lined. But I recognized her immediately. She had trained me when I first arrived, had taught me the proper formats for documentation, had approved my early work with patient corrections and occasional praise. She looked up when I entered with my enforcement team. I saw recognition flash across her face, followed by confusion, then understanding, then fear. "Scribe Tertius," she said, using my old designation. "They said you had been selected for sacred service. We hoped you were blessed." "I am interrogator of the Holy Inquisition," I replied. "You will accompany us for questioning regarding suspected heretical activity." We took her to a holding facility in the lower hive. She went quietly, still confused, still believing there had been some mistake that would be corrected once the truth was known. She maintained this belief through the first hour of interrogation. Through my questions about her activities, her associations, her knowledge of cult operations in the administratum. She denied everything, insisted she was loyal, recited prayers with genuine devotion, begged to be believed. Savant Grotius began his work at the second hour. She broke at hour 5. The confession came in fragments between sobs and screaming. Her son had become involved with the cult 3 years prior, had pressured her to attend meetings. She had gone 3 times, terrified to refuse, not understanding what she was witnessing until it was too late. She had seen rituals performed, had heard names spoken that should never be uttered, had been marked by exposure even if she did not participate willingly. By inquisitorial law, exposure was sufficient. Intent was irrelevant. Corruption spreads through witnessing as surely as through willing participation. She had been contaminated. She had to be purged. I could have falsified the report, could have claimed she was peripheral, coerced, not truly tainted, could have recommended mind scrubbing and reassignment rather than execution. The authority was mine. The decision would not be questioned. Instead, I signed the execution order myself, watched as she was led to the purging chamber, stood witness as the flames consumed her body while she screamed prayers to the emperor she had served faithfully for 67 years. I felt nothing. Later, alone in my quarters, I realized this absence of feeling was not strength. It was not the detachment necessary for duty. It was the final death of who I had been. The person who had left Venora 9 years ago no longer existed in any meaningful way. What remained was a tool, efficient, precise, utterly empty of everything that had once made me human. Scribe Tertius had died during that first ascent from the hive. Only the Inquisition's instrument remained, wearing his memories like an ill-fitting coat. The cathedral bells call the faithful to evening prayers, and I stand once more at the marble basin, watching water flow over hands that will never be clean. I understand now what I am trying to wash away. Not blood, though there has been so much of it. Not the physical stains of violence and death. Those come off easily enough with soap and water and time. What I am trying to cleanse is memory, humanity, the last traces of innocence that somehow survived everything I have witnessed and done. But memory does not wash away. Humanity once lost cannot be reclaimed through ritual or prayer, and innocence once destroyed leaves a void that nothing can fill. I will serve the Inquisition until I die. This is not faith speaking, not devotion or belief in some greater purpose that justifies all sacrifices. It is simple recognition of reality. I have seen too much to ever return to normal life. The things I know would drive ordinary citizens mad or mark them for execution. I cannot unsee what I have witnessed, cannot unknow what I have learned, cannot become again the unremarkable scribe who processed shipping manifests and believed the Imperium's simple narratives about good and evil. I know too much to be allowed to leave. The Inquisition does not grant retirement to those who have served in positions like mine. We know the methods, the compromises, the hypocrisies that keep humanity alive. We are security risks by our very existence. Those who survive long enough either die in service or are quietly eliminated when we become more liability than asset. I have become too useful to be discarded yet. My efficiency is noted in reports. My lack of hesitation valued by superiors who need servants capable of doing terrible things without breaking. I am precisely what the Inquisition requires. A human stripped of humanity, capable of wielding authority without being paralyzed by conscience. The irony does not escape me. I was selected to fight monsters, believed I would stand against the forces of corruption and preserve the innocent from darkness. Instead, I became the monster, not corrupted by chaos or tainted by warp exposure, but transformed by certainty and necessity into something that commits atrocities in the name of protection. But I accept this. Someone must do this work. Someone must carry the burden of terrible knowledge and impossible choices. Someone must be willing to damn their own soul, so billions of others can live in ignorance of the prices paid for their survival. The faithful in this cathedral sing their hymns and offer their prayers, never knowing about the governor I murdered, the innocent woman I executed, the countless compromises and corruptions I have witnessed and enabled. They do not need to know. Perhaps they could not bear knowing. Their faith is simple and pure because people like me exist in the shadows, doing what must be done so they can continue believing the Imperium is righteous rather than simply necessary. I dry my hands on the rough towel. The water was always clean. The stain was always inside me, growing deeper with each mission, each compromise, each death I authorized or witnessed or caused. No amount of washing will remove it. No prayer will absolve it. No confession will lift the weight of what I carry. But duty does not require absolution. It requires only continuation. I fold the towel precisely and return it to its place. I straighten my uniform, ensuring every detail meets regulation standards. I check my reflection one final time in the polished brass mirror. The face looking back is cold and empty and utterly committed to service that will end only with death. The faithful continue their evening hymns. I listen for a moment, remembering distantly what it felt like to believe those words meant something beyond rhetorical comfort. Then I turn away from the basin and the mirror and the last pretense of cleanliness. There is work to be done, reports to file, evidence to catalogue, investigations to conduct. The Inquisition's machinery requires constant maintenance, and I am a functioning component of that machinery. Efficient, reliable, utterly expendable when I inevitably wear out or break down. I return to duty because duty is all that remains. Everything else, everything I was before that shuttle carried me away from Venora, has been burned away in service of something larger and more terrible than individual existence can comprehend. The Emperor protects. This is what the faithful believe, what they sing in their hymns and whisper in their prayers. And they are correct, though not in the way they imagine. The Emperor protects through instruments like me, through servants willing to become monsters so others can remain innocent, through the Inquisition's endless watch against threats that would devour humanity if given the smallest opportunity. I am that instrument, broken, stained, damned by my own choices and the impossible necessities of this work, but still functioning, still useful, still serving the realm with methods the faithful must never know. The cathedral doors close behind me. The hymns fade into distance. The night is cold and the stars are hidden behind layers of atmospheric pollution. I walk through streets where citizens go about their lives, unaware of the darkness held at bay by people they will never meet and could never understand. This is what it means to serve the Inquisition. This is what I have become. This is the price of humanity's survival, paid in souls that damn themselves so others need not. The counting continues. The dead accumulate. The stain spreads deeper. And I endure because someone must.